"You're here to help, not to vacation," Daniel Parker said to his own mother less than an hour after she stepped into his house, and in that one sentence Evelyn Parker felt the entire purpose of her visit shift under her feet. At 68, Evelyn had not flown 2,000 miles from Ohio to Arizona expecting luxury. She had not imagined resort days, poolside drinks, or some picture-perfect getaway under the desert sun. What she had imagined was simpler than that and somehow more precious. She thought her son had invited her because he missed her. She thought his children wanted to spend time with their grandmother. She thought a week in his home would mean shared breakfasts, bedtime stories, and maybe one quiet afternoon where she could sit on the back patio with a glass of iced tea and feel, if only for a moment, like she was still an important part of her family's life. Instead, before her carry-on was even fully unzipped in the guest room, Melissa had pointed out where the extra towels were kept, where the lunch containers went, which child needed to be picked up at 3:30, and which one had soccer practice on Wednesday. Evelyn had smiled through all of it at first because that was what women like her had done for decades. They smoothed over awkwardness. They gave grace before asking questions. They told themselves that tired young parents did not always sound the way they meant to sound. But then came dinner, if a rushed plate of reheated pasta could even be called dinner, and when Evelyn mentioned that she might take the kids to the community pool one afternoon so they could all enjoy the warm weather, Daniel did not laugh, did not soften, did not even look embarrassed. He just set down his fork and said it plainly, like a correction that should have been obvious from the start. She was there to help, not to vacation. The words hung in the kitchen longer than any prayer ever had. Melissa stayed quiet, which somehow made it worse. She did not defend Evelyn. She did not say that was not what they meant. She simply kept clearing plates, as if Daniel had only reminded everyone of a household rule. Evelyn looked down at her napkin and folded it once, then twice, her hand steady even as something deep inside her began to crack. It was not only the insult that stung. It was the certainty in his voice, the ease with which he had reduced her from mother to unpaid help. In that instant, Evelyn understood that this trip had never been a reunion in Daniel's mind. It was coverage. It was convenience. It was a solution to a childcare problem dressed up as a loving invitation. She said nothing for the rest of the meal. She asked the children about school, complimented the salad Melissa barely touched, and carried her own dish to the sink with the same quiet dignity she had carried through widowhood, through hard winters, through every season of sacrifice no one had ever thanked her for properly. But late that night, sitting alone on the edge of the guest bed in a house that suddenly felt much colder than the Arizona air outside, Evelyn opened her laptop, stared at the airline website, and began to realize that the most important part of this visit had not even happened yet. For several minutes, Evelyn just sat there with the glow of the screen reflecting in her glasses, while the house settled into silence around her. From down the hall she could hear the dryer tumbling a load of children's clothes, and somewhere outside a neighbor's dog barked once and then stopped. It was nearly 11:30 in Arizona, which meant it felt even later to her body, still carrying Ohio time and the exhaustion of air travel. She should have been asleep. Instead, she was staring at flight options home as if they belonged to someone else's life. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then pulled back, then moved forward again. The first wave of hurt had been sharp, but this second wave was quieter and somehow heavier. It was the kind that made a woman revisit every small moment and see it clearly for the first time. Daniel had not really hugged her at the airport. He had waved from the curb and loaded her suitcase into the back of the sport utility vehicle, while taking a work call through his headset. Melissa had greeted her with a quick smile, but before Evelyn had even sat down, she was hearing schedules, snack rules, school pickup times, and reminders about who liked crusts cut off and who refused anything green. Even the guest room had not felt like a room prepared for someone cherished. It was neat enough, but there were folded baskets of laundry stacked in the corner and a portable crib pushed against the wall as though space had merely been made for her instead of offered to her. All evening, Evelyn had tried to give the visit the benefit of the doubt. She told herself young families were stretched thin. She told herself Daniel was under pressure. She told herself Melissa probably did not mean to sound brisk. But the more she replayed the day, the less room there was for excuses. This had been planned. Not cruelly perhaps, not with open malice, but with a thoughtlessness that landed in the same place. Daniel had invited his mother the way a person booked a service they needed. That was the truth she could no longer smooth over. Evelyn clicked on a morning flight leaving Phoenix just after 8. The fare was higher than she liked, and under normal circumstances she would have closed the laptop and waited for a better price. But this was not about money. It was about something she had spent too many years giving away in small pieces without noticing. Her dignity. She entered her information carefully, reading every line twice. Evelyn May Parker. Departure Phoenix. Arrival Columbus. 1 carry-on. No checked bag. The confirmation page appeared with a soft chime, and she let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. For the first time since dinner, her chest loosened. She was still hurt. She was still disappointed. But now the hurt had direction. She closed the laptop and looked around the room one more time, at the pale walls, the half-drawn blinds, the laundry basket that was not hers, and she understood something with sudden clarity. Love did not require her to stay where she was being quietly used. Before turning off the lamp, Evelyn set her alarm for 5:30, then placed her phone face down on the nightstand. By morning, Daniel and Melissa would still have a busy house, demanding children, and too much to do. The only difference was that they would have to manage it without pretending his mother had come all this way for the privilege of carrying it for them. At 5:30 the next morning, Evelyn woke before the alarm, as if some part of her had stayed awake all night just to make sure she did not lose her nerve. For a moment she lay still beneath the light cotton blanket, listening to the low hum of the air conditioner and the faint quiet of a house not yet in motion. Then she sat up, slipped on her shoes, and began packing the few things she had taken out. She folded her nightgown with careful hands, zipped her toiletry bag, and checked her phone for the flight confirmation again, not because she had forgotten booking it, but because seeing it there made her feel steady. By 6:15, her suitcase was standing by the door, her purse was on her shoulder, and she was dressed in the same soft blue cardigan she had worn on the flight from Columbus. She looked around the guest room one last time, not with sorrow exactly, but with the tired clarity of someone who had finally stopped lying to herself. When Evelyn stepped into the kitchen, the sky outside the windows was only beginning to brighten over the desert, painting the edges of the mountains in a pale dusty pink. She reached for a mug then stopped. This was no longer her morning to prepare breakfast for a household that had mistaken her love for labor. Instead, she poured herself a small glass of water, set the house key on the counter where Daniel would see it, and waited. Melissa appeared first, wrapped in a robe, her hair pulled back, her expression still half asleep until she noticed the suitcase. She blinked once, then looked from Evelyn to the front door as if trying to make sense of the scene. Evelyn did not fill the silence for her. A few seconds later Daniel came in, glancing at his phone, already dressed for work, and only when he looked up did his face change. The confidence he had carried the night before slipped almost instantly into confusion. He asked where she was going, though the answer was standing right in front of him. Evelyn said she had an early flight home. She kept her voice calm, so calm that it seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. Daniel frowned and asked why she would do that after just arriving, and Melissa quickly added that the children would be disappointed, though even she did not sound fully convinced by her own words. Evelyn studied them both for a moment and saw not concern, but inconvenience. Not heartbreak, but disruption. The realization hurt less now because it no longer surprised her. She told Daniel that she had misunderstood the purpose of the trip, and now that she understood it clearly, she was correcting her mistake. He began to protest, saying she was overreacting, saying he had only meant they needed help, saying families were supposed to show up for each other. Evelyn let him speak until he ran out of easy explanations. Then she answered in the same measured tone she had once used to settle her children after storms and fevers and broken school friendships. She said families did show up for each other, but they did not summon each other under the name of love, and then hand out duties like assignments. Daniel looked away first. Melissa crossed her arms, saying nothing. The silence that followed was not loud, but it was final. Evelyn took the handle of her suitcase, turned toward the door, and in that quiet kitchen, just before stepping out into the cool Arizona morning, she understood that leaving was not the end of the wound. It was the beginning of her refusing to carry it for them. The rideshare pulled away from the curb just as the first full stretch of daylight settled over the neighborhood, and Evelyn watched Daniel's house grow smaller through the window until it disappeared behind a line of tidy desert shrubs and stucco walls the color of sand. She did not look back after that. The driver, a pleasant man in his 40s with a baseball cap and a low voice, asked if she was heading to the airport for business or vacation, and for one brief second Evelyn almost laughed at the irony of it. Instead she said she was heading home earlier than planned, and he nodded with the easy politeness of someone who knew better than to ask for more. The city outside moved past in broad clean lines, 6-lane roads, gas stations, coffee shops already filling with commuters, and distant mountains standing still under a pale gold sky. Arizona was beautiful in a way that felt open and expensive, but that morning Evelyn could not enjoy any of it. Her mind kept returning not to the argument she had not had, but to the years that had led up to this moment. Daniel had not always spoken to her with that clipped impatience. There had been a time when he called every Sunday without fail, when he still asked for her chicken noodle soup recipe, when he used to joke that no one folded a fitted sheet better than his mother. Even after he married Melissa, Evelyn had tried very hard to be respectful, careful, modern in all the ways older women were told to be. She did not interfere. She did not offer too much advice. She mailed birthday checks, remembered the children's shoe sizes, and never once made a comment about how often she had rearranged her own life for their convenience. She had told herself that being easygoing was the same as being loved. Somewhere along the line, Daniel had started expecting what she had once given freely. That was the part that hurt most now. People always talked about cruelty as if it arrived loudly, all at once, with obvious signs and sharp edges. But sometimes it arrived dressed as familiarity. Sometimes it sounded like a son assuming his mother would of course say yes, of course fly across the country, of course step into the role assigned to her without needing to be asked properly, thanked sincerely, or treated gently. By the time the car reached the airport, Evelyn no longer felt shaky. Tired, yes. Saddened, certainly. But not shaky. She paid for the ride, thanked the driver, and wheeled her suitcase through the sliding glass doors into the cool artificial air of the terminal. Everything inside was bright and orderly, the click of suitcase wheels against tile, the distant hum of announcements, the smell of coffee and cinnamon from a kiosk near security. Around her, people hurried in family clusters and business pairs, but Evelyn moved at her own pace. She printed her boarding pass, handed over her identification, and stood in the security line with the calm patience of someone who had spent a lifetime waiting her turn. It was only when she reached her gate and lowered herself into one of the blue vinyl chairs that her phone lit up with Daniel's name across the screen. Evelyn looked at it for a long moment without answering. Then another message appeared, and then another. She did not open them right away. Something in her knew that whatever Daniel had to say now would reveal more than he realized, and for the first time in a very long time, Evelyn was prepared to listen without making excuses for him. Only after the third message did Evelyn tap the screen and read what her son had sent. The first one said that she was being dramatic. The second asked how she expected them to manage the week now. The third was shorter than the others, and somehow more revealing than either of the first two. It said that Melissa had already rearranged her work schedule, and the children were upset and confused. Evelyn stared at the words for several seconds, then slowly set the phone in her lap. Not one message asked if she was all right. Not one said he was sorry. Not one acknowledged what he had said to her in that kitchen or how deeply it had landed. Daniel was not reaching out as a son whose conscience had caught up with him. He was reaching out as a man whose plan had fallen apart. Around her, the gate area filled with the ordinary sounds of travel, rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, someone laughing too loudly into a headset, a child asking for orange juice from a paper cup. Life moved on around Evelyn with that indifferent steadiness airports seemed to specialize in, and in the middle of it she felt a strange calm settle over her. For years she had been trained by love to hear need as proof of closeness. If Daniel needed her, then surely that meant she mattered. If the grandchildren were easier with her there, then surely her sacrifices were worthwhile. If Melissa leaned on her during busy weeks, then surely she was still included in the life of that home. But sitting there under the bright terminal lights, Evelyn finally saw the difference between being valued and being useful. Useful people were noticed when they were absent. Valued people were noticed when they were hurting. Her phone buzzed again with an incoming call, and this time she answered. Daniel did not say hello in the warm way he once had when he was young and still called from college dorm rooms asking how long to bake chicken breasts or whether white shirts should be washed separately. His voice was tight, already impatient, already organized around his own inconvenience. He asked her why she was doing this, and Evelyn answered that she was going home. He said that was obvious and asked why she had to make such a point. Evelyn nearly smiled at that. Men like Daniel always thought dignity was a performance when it interrupted their convenience. She told him calmly that the point had not been made by her leaving. The point had been made the night before, and she was simply responding to it. He said she was twisting his words. He said everyone in the family helped each other. He said Melissa had a lot on her plate and the children had been looking forward to having Grandma there. Evelyn listened without interrupting, and the longer he spoke, the clearer it became that he still had not understood the injury. Finally she asked him a question so quiet and direct that he stopped talking. She asked whether he had invited her because he missed her, or because he needed coverage. There was a pause on the line long enough to answer everything. Daniel did not say either word, but he did not have to. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment and let that silence settle where excuses used to live. Then she told him she loved him because that part was still true, but love was not the same as permission. She said she hoped he would remember that before asking her for anything again. When the boarding announcement began a few minutes later, Evelyn rose from her chair, lifted her purse onto her shoulder, and stepped into the line with the steady composure of a woman who had finally heard the truth in full and no longer intended to bargain with it. The plane lifted off over the dry Arizona landscape with a low steady roar, and Evelyn kept her eyes on the window until the neighborhoods, roads, and tan stretches of desert blurred into something distant enough to stop feeling personal. Once the aircraft leveled out, she folded her hands in her lap and let herself sit in the quiet she had earned. No one was asking her where the juice boxes were. No one was handing her a list. No one was speaking to her as though love came with duties attached. A flight attendant passed with coffee and water, and Evelyn asked for black coffee and thanked her with the kind of sincerity that rose naturally from a woman who had spent the last 24 hours being treated like a convenience instead of a person. Across the aisle, a young mother bounced a restless toddler on her knee while trying to open a packet of crackers, and without thinking Evelyn almost leaned over to help. The instinct was still there, immediate and familiar. But this time she stopped herself. Not out of bitterness, and not because kindness had left her, but because she was beginning to understand that every instinct did not have to become an obligation. She sipped her coffee slowly and thought about all the years she had measured her worth by what she could absorb. How much she could smooth over, how often she could rescue a situation before anyone else felt the discomfort of it. When Daniel was 10 and forgot his science project, she had stayed up past midnight helping him rebuild it from poster board and glue sticks. When he was 16 and wrecked his first car, she had been the one who picked him up from the mechanic and told him that mistakes did not define a good person. When he was 24 and heartbroken after a failed relationship, he had sat at her kitchen table eating soup while she reminded him he was still loved. Evelyn had been his softness for decades. Perhaps that was why this new hardness in him felt so disorienting. It was not only that he had used her. It was that he had done it with the calm entitlement of someone who believed her giving was permanent, automatic, and guaranteed. Halfway through the flight, her phone, now in airplane mode, held Daniel's last unanswered message like a sealed envelope she no longer needed to open. Evelyn already knew what would be inside: some version of blame, urgency, rearranged schedules, maybe even a carefully worded attempt at guilt wrapped in concern. But for the first time in her life, she did not feel compelled to manage someone else's feelings before tending to her own. She leaned her head back against the seat and looked out at the clouds, white and endless, bright as fresh linen under the midday sun. Somewhere over New Mexico, then farther east, the air turned slightly rough and the plane shook just enough to stir nervous laughter from a few passengers. Evelyn did not flinch. She had lived through far more unsettling jolts than turbulence. By the time the captain announced their descent into Columbus, something inside her had settled into place. She was not returning home in defeat. She was returning home with clarity. Daniel might tell himself his mother had overreacted. Melissa might call it poor timing. But Evelyn knew better now. A woman did not have to wait for cruelty to become loud before calling it what it was. And as the wheels touched down on Ohio soil with one firm jolt and a rush of speed against the runway, Evelyn made herself a quiet promise that the next conversation with her son would not begin with apology. It would begin with truth. By the time Evelyn pulled her suitcase through her own front door in Columbus, the late afternoon light had turned soft and gray against the familiar siding of the neighboring houses, and for the first time since leaving Arizona, she felt the full weight of the last 2 days settle into her bones. Home did not welcome her with noise or demands. It welcomed her with stillness. The quiet living room, the framed family photographs on the mantel, the Afghan folded over the arm of the sofa, even the faint scent of lavender from the linen spray she used on her curtains all seemed to remind her of something she had almost forgotten in Daniel's house. Her life was not an extension of someone else's schedule. She set down her purse, rolled her suitcase into the hallway, and stood there for a moment with one hand on the wall, breathing in the calm she had worked so hard to protect. Then her phone rang again. Daniel. Evelyn let it ring twice before answering. This time his voice sounded different. Less impatient. Less certain. He did not begin with accusation. He began by saying the children had asked where Grandma went. He said his youngest had cried when Melissa explained that Evelyn had gone home. Evelyn closed her eyes, not because the words softened her, but because they struck exactly where guilt always tried to enter. For years, motherhood had trained her to react fastest to sadness in others, especially when children were involved. Daniel knew that. Whether he meant to or not, he was reaching for the oldest lever he had. Evelyn asked quietly whether he was calling because the children missed her or because the house had become harder to run without her there. Daniel did not answer right away, and in that brief silence she heard dishes clinking in the background, one child calling for a snack, another asking where a backpack was. Life unassisted. Real life. When he finally spoke, he said things had been hectic. Melissa had missed a meeting. The sitter they called could only cover part of the afternoon. Dinner had ended up being drive-through food, and nobody had slept well. Evelyn listened, and each detail confirmed what she had already understood at the airport. They did not feel her absence first in their hearts. They felt it in their logistics. She sat down slowly in her armchair by the window and told Daniel she was sorry the children were upset, but she was not sorry she left. He exhaled sharply and said he had not realized she would take his words so seriously. Evelyn looked out at her backyard, where the bare branches of her maple tree moved gently in the Ohio wind, and she answered with a steadiness that surprised even her. She told him that was exactly the problem. He had spoken carelessly because he assumed she would carry the meaning carefully for him, the way she always had. But she was done translating disrespect into stress, and she was done dressing up entitlement as family need. The line stayed quiet after that, so quiet that Evelyn could almost feel her son hearing her for the first time, not as background support, not as the dependable mother who would eventually smooth everything over, but as a woman who still had a self to protect. And when Daniel finally spoke again, his voice had lost something it had carried for years without his even knowing it. It had lost its certainty that she would always stay no matter how little she was asked, and how much she was expected to give. After that call, the silence between them stretched across 3 full days. Daniel did not send another message that evening, and Evelyn did not reach for her phone to fill the space he had finally left behind. Instead, she moved through her own house with a kind of deliberate gentleness, unpacking her suitcase, hanging her blue cardigan back in the closet, watering the small fern in the kitchen window, and letting herself return to the ordinary rhythm of a life that belonged to her. But even in Ohio, the consequences of what had happened in Arizona kept unfolding. On the 4th morning, Melissa called. That alone was unusual enough to make Evelyn pause before answering. Her daughter-in-law had always been polite, efficient, and careful with words, but never especially warm unless a holiday or family photo required it. This time Melissa did not bother with small talk. She sounded tired in a way that could not be hidden under good manners. She said the week had been harder than expected. The sitter they found wanted more per hour than they had planned to pay. The children had been cranky. Daniel had been late to work twice. One of the boys had forgotten his lunch, and the youngest had refused to go to bed without asking why Grandma left so fast. Melissa said all of it in a tone that was meant to sound factual, but Evelyn heard the strain underneath. For a moment neither woman spoke. Then Melissa said she thought Evelyn could have given them more notice. Evelyn nearly asked whether more notice would have mattered if the treatment had stayed the same, but she did not waste the breath. Instead she said that when a person realized she had been invited under false pretenses, Leaving quickly was the notice. Melissa let out a short breath on the other end. Not quite a laugh and not yet an apology. She said they had simply assumed Evelyn understood how much help they needed. That sentence settled over Evelyn more heavily than anything else. Assumed. There it was again, the quiet engine under all of it. They had assumed she would absorb the trip, the labor, the dismissal, and the insult because she was Daniel's mother, and because women like Evelyn had been raised to interpret assumption as belonging. But now the assumption itself was finally visible, and once a thing had been named clearly, it lost some of its power. Evelyn told Melissa that needing help was not shameful. Asking honestly was not shameful either. What had crossed the line was disguising duty as affection, and expecting gratitude from the person being used. Melissa did not interrupt. In the pause that followed, Evelyn sensed not softness exactly, but the first crack in a certainty Melissa had been carrying for years. Before ending the call, Melissa said the children wanted to video chat that weekend if Evelyn was up for it. Evelyn said yes to the children, because none of this was their fault, but no to another visit anytime soon. She said it calmly, as one states a fact about weather or distance or age. After they hung up, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cooler between her hands and felt something shift again. Smaller than triumph but stronger than hurt. Out in Arizona, Daniel and Melissa were finally being forced to feel the true shape of the life they had built, not supported invisibly by his mother's labor, but carried by their own choices, their own planning, their own fatigue. And back in Ohio, Evelyn understood that sometimes the most powerful lesson a mother could give her grown child was not another rescue. Sometimes it was the absence of one. The video chat with the children happened that Saturday afternoon, and Evelyn made sure her smile was real before she answered the call. She had changed into a soft green sweater, brushed her hair, and set her tablet on the kitchen table beside a vase of grocery store daisies, not because anyone had asked her to, but because she wanted the children to see warmth when they looked at her. Their little faces crowded the screen almost immediately, talking over one another, asking why she had left so fast, whether she was coming back soon, whether it was cold in Ohio, whether Grandma still had the cookie cutters shaped like stars. Evelyn answered each question gently. Yes, Ohio was cooler than Arizona. Yes, she still had the cookie cutters. Yes, she missed them very much. No, she was not sure yet when she would visit again. She kept her tone light but not false. Children could hear strain even when adults imagined they were hiding it. Behind them, Melissa moved through the kitchen with slower steps than usual, and Daniel appeared once near the end of the call, standing just far enough back that it was obvious he was unsure whether to come closer. Evelyn noticed everything without drawing attention to any of it. When the children ran off to show her a school project, Daniel finally stepped into full view. He looked tired in a way she had not seen before, older somehow, less shielded by routine. He asked if she had made it home all right, though he knew she had. Then he thanked her for talking to the kids. Evelyn nodded. The silence between them was not easy, but it was honest, and for the first time that made it bearable. Daniel cleared his throat and said that things had been difficult since she left. He admitted they had gotten used to assuming she would say yes. He said he had not realized how bad it sounded until the house got quiet and his own words came back to him without the rush of the moment to excuse them. Evelyn listened, her face calm, her hands folded loosely in front of her. She did not rush to comfort him. She did not step in to reduce his discomfort. That was part of what had changed. At last Daniel said he was sorry. Not sorry the week had become inconvenient. Not sorry she had taken offense. Sorry for how he had spoken to her. And sorry for treating her presence like a function instead of a gift. The apology did not erase what had happened, and Evelyn did not pretend that it did. But she could hear the difference now. This was not panic talking. It was recognition. She told him she appreciated the apology, and that if they were going to move forward it would have to be on different terms. If he invited her again, it would be because he wanted her company, not because he needed unpaid help. If they needed support, they would ask honestly and accept that she might say no. Daniel nodded with the sober expression of a man hearing boundaries from his mother for the first time in his life. After the call ended, Evelyn sat alone in her quiet kitchen, while the late afternoon sun stretched across the table in long golden bands. She felt no triumph, only peace. She still loved her son. She still loved those children with the fierce tenderness grandmothers carry like a second heartbeat. But love, she now understood more clearly than ever, did not require self-erasure. A woman could be kind without being available for misuse. She could be generous without surrendering her dignity. And in the stillness of her own home, with the Ohio light soft against the walls and no one asking anything from her that she had not freely chosen to give, Evelyn finally felt what had been missing all along. Not revenge. Not vindication. Respect beginning with her own.